One night, the proprietor of a well-known restaurant chain entered one of his own eateries, but not as the affluent. Stay attentive until the very end. You won't believe what happens next. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. He was a well-known businessman in tattered clothes who wanted to see how his employees treated regular customers. Jonathan Hayes entered La Verona wearing faded trousers, no suit, and no polished shoes. Scuffed sneakers and a faded jacket, he appeared to be someone who didn't belong, with a cap pulled low over his forehead and a face that no one could identify. But this man wasn't just any man. He owned the establishment and had been receiving complaints about rude employees and unjust treatment for weeks. Working-class people were treated like a burden by a manager who only cared about wealthy clients, who disregarded them unless they appeared to have money. Employees who used to take pride in their work now adhered to the poisonous culture of favoritism. Jonathan began his empire with a small food stand, worked long nights, persevered through setbacks, and treated each client as though they were important. This is how he transformed Leona into a chain of upscale restaurants. But now that vision was being tarnished. He wasn't taking over as the owner tonight. Instead, he was here as a test. He pushed the door open and entered without saying hello or acknowledging anyone. The hostess stood at the podium, glancing briefly at him before ignoring him as if he weren't there. A wealthy couple wearing luxury clothing came in after him, and her entire attitude transformed. She greeted them with a bright smile and as though they were royalty. Jonathan looked around. The waiters moved quickly between tables, their posture straight, and their attention was on the well-dressed patrons. No one looked his way, so he cleared his throat. A moment went by, and then another. Jonathan sighed, confirming that the rumors were true. Rather than creating a scene, he went quietly to a small corner table and sat down, tapping his fingers against the wooden surface. Now that it was time to see how bad things had gotten, he waited for 15 minutes without a single waiter approaching, and at last he raised a hand signaling for serve. The manager of the restaurant saw him. Mark was in his mid-40s, well-dressed, and had a sneer that exuded superiority. He was the kind of person who evaluated others based more on their income and looks than on their morals. "I fear you might be in the wrong place, sir." Mark strode over to Jonathan's table with his arms crossed. Jonathan's eyebrows went up. "I wanted to place an order for dinner." Mark laughed. "Oh, do you realize how expensive this place is?" As he looked at Jonathan's attire with evident amusement. "Our cheapest meal costs more than what you're wearing," Mark said, but Jonathan stayed composed. "I want a glass of fresh juice and the steak." Mark scoffed. "I'd like a private jet." And he let out a dramatic sigh. "Listen, old man. This isn't a soup kitchen, therefore I don't want to waste my employees' time." The adjacent customers laughed and were amused by the humiliation. Jonathan put a black card, the kind that only the wealthiest people carried, on the table after reaching into his pocket. Mark's grin briefly changed before he mocked. "Nice prop. Where did you steal it from?" Jonathan sighed gently. "I still want my order." A waiter hesitated but nodded when Mark rolled his eyes and flicked his fingers at him, asking for whatever was cheapest and expedited. Jonathan watched as Mark walked off, giggling to himself that he had just embarrassed his own boss, and he was unaware that when the food came, it wasn't what he had ordered. Instead of a nice steak, he got a plate of cold bread and a tiny bowl of soup. Jonathan took a bite out of the plate, but he stayed composed, watching as Mark amused wealthy patrons, laughing loudly, making sure their meals were flawless, greeting them with a warmth he had denied Jonathan, and then the restaurant doors opened. Mr. Sinclair, the regional director of the restaurant chain, arrived in a sharply dressed man in a fitted suit. Mark's smug grin vanished as he hurried forward with excitement, saying, "What a wonderful surprise, sir. Please have a seat. We'll bring you our best fresh juice." Instead of answering, Sinclair strode right by Mark and toward Jonathan. Mark squinted in perplexity as Sir Sinclair said, "We weren't expecting you tonight." The diner became silent in astonishment. The clients who had laughed at Mark's smirk vanished, and his face turned pale. Jonathan stopped eating. At last, Jonathan set down his fork. "I wanted to observe how my clients are handled when there is a great deal of stillness, and nobody knows who I am." Mark's mouth opened, closed, and then opened once more. "I was unaware that Jonathan had his eyes pierced, sir. Would that have changed anything?" Jonathan shook his head, saying, "You judged me based on my clothes and assumed my worth based on appearances. Is this how you treat people when you believe they are beneath you?" The employees bowed their heads in humiliation. Mark felt his legs grow weak, his customary confidence crumbling into fear. Mark stumbled, "Sir, and I beg you to stop making fun of someone you believe to be impoverished." Jonathan completed the task for him. Jonathan sighed. "You've had 5 years to change." And Mark's face blazed hot. "I swear I can change." Mark froze, and then the words, "You're fired," echoed throughout the restaurant, causing everyone to gasp. Some employees appeared relieved, while others exchanged anxious looks. Mark stumbled backward, his entire world collapsing. "Please, sir, I need this job." Jonathan's tone was composed yet stern, thus you ought to have handled people more politely. With his head bowed, Mark slowly turned and headed toward the exit, embarrassed in the same manner that he had humiliated others. Mark stood frozen, understanding there was no way out. Turning to face James, the young waiter who had hesitated earlier, Jonathan asked, "How would you like to be the new manager?" James stuttered, "Yes, sir." But I could see that Jonathan had examined him first. James's eyes made me wide-eyed. Jonathan grinned, saying, "You demonstrated kindness even when it wasn't easy. That's the kind of leadership we need." A hopeful mutter went through the workers. James stood tall and said, "I won't let you down, sir." Jonathan nodded and said, "I know you won't." He turned to the other employees and said, "Let this be a lesson. No one, no matter how rich or poor, deserves to be looked down upon. This restaurant isn't just about fine dining, it's about respect." As the words sank in, everyone in the room straightened their backs, ready to make a change, and as Jonathan finally received his steak, the restaurant felt different because, going forward, nothing would be the same because true character is revealed in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. Integrity does those who harshly evaluate others frequently end up paying the price for their deeds. What do you think of this story? True respect is earned by how we treat others, not by our wealth or rank. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly due to their appearance? If you think that everyone deserves respect regardless of who they are, then leave a comment below. You can also hit the like button and subscribe for more compelling stories. I'll see you at the next one.